Should you play Ghostrunner 2? Now, I had a lot of fun playing Ghostrunner 2, so I think you probably should play it. Now that's out of the way, let's talk about the game completely. I really liked Ghostrunner 2's basic aesthetic of being basically a true dystopian fantasy that's very reminiscent of Asimov's book The Bunker, where the last dregs of humanity have been forced by an administrator slash AI to lock every single remaining human into some sort of torturous little experimentation cube, as you would, and the outside is incredibly dangerous. And in Asimov's book, when the residents of the cube escape the asylum, they find out that it is most definitely worse on the outside than it is on the inside. And this is very important because the same thing happens in this game, but to a much lesser extent. I believe in the book they go outside and they see a tree, and as they approach a tree, this giant monster thing just completely obliterates them or something like that. I haven't read the book in a long time, so I can't remember all the specifics. In Ghostrunner 2, we play as Jack, a cybernetic ninja, which is very similar to Metal Gear Solid's Jack, who is a cybernetic ninja with the codename Raiden. And I believe these coincidences do not really end there, and I feel like they have massive love for Kojima and Kojima style writing, which is why everything is very over the top and exuberant and, well, quite frankly, fantastical. It's great. We have very obvious villains who are being very maniacal with their villainy, and they have very straightforward reasonings behind them. The main antagonist of the game is a rogue Ghostrunner who has very deep-seated hatred towards the previous administration. And that previous administration leads to him rebelling against his own programming and wanting to destroy the entire Dharma Station. The Dharma Station is of course where everyone lives. Now, I didn't play Ghostrunner 1, but I heard lots of good things about it, and the reason why I haven't played it was I couldn't find a good cheap copy of the game at the time. I'm sure it's fairly cheap now, but you know, c'est la vie. He gives us this little introduction at the start of the game to catch us up on what happened in Ghostrunner 1, where essentially we find out that Jack, the Ghostrunner, fights against his own programming to fight against his master, the administrator, who is now dead and is a AI inside the asylum. He defeats the AI and by doing so destroys the cyber void, which is essentially the backing information for all robots in the facility. Now, if the cyber void destroyed, essentially Jack kills himself. However, in Ghostrunner 2, Jack somehow has survived and returned, and we find out that the cyber void has also returned, and the story revolves around trying to understand how and why the cyber void has returned, and of course these new Ghostrunners that have appeared with the return of the cyber void. To do this, we have to orchestrate some very elaborate and fun murders of humans and robots and zombie robots alike, and this is where the game shines because it becomes more of a Hotline Miami sort of execution style where you have to constantly repeat the mission over and over until you get that one good run where you murder everyone inside the house perfectly and flawlessly. Because in this game, everyone dies in one hit, including yourself, so when you screw up, you die. Fortunately for us, the restart button is instantaneous. I don't know if this is entirely because of how good loading is nowadays, but I'm sure it still was fantastically fast in Ghostrunner 1. In order to enact our sweet, sweet vengeance upon all humanity and robots alike, we have many tools at our disposal. We have the dash, we have the block, we have the reflect, and we have various abilities that help us in both platforming and murder, such as the shuriken, a force push ability, and ability to go invisible and leave a clone of sorts behind, a legendary clone that is. By using these various abilities, we can traverse the world and discover more and more about the world that we're in. Unfortunately, there is one major problem with this game in its combat loop, which is the final boss fight, because these final bosses are no longer a single hit kill, and they are in fact a boss with a health bar. Now, I found every single boss to be quite mechanically confusing and quite frankly a bit silly, and I ended up cheesing a lot of the bosses. I don't think that these games cannot have bosses, but I think they require a little bit more planning and execution in order to get the bosses right. I especially liked when bosses had sort of taught us how to beat them before we come to the boss. For example, the second boss that we fight in the game, he summons creatures that we have to fight, and he also does very similar attacks to all the enemies we have fought thus far. Throughout Ghostrunner 2, we have a hub area where we meet our various companions that will talk to us throughout the game, and they have varying different interest levels to me. Some of them are just bland, boring cardboard cutouts of people such as Saul. Then there are other people like Kira that actually started to grow on me and become very interesting. However, it felt like Kira was two different people throughout the game. At the hub world, she was very standoffish and kind of boring to me, yet whenever I was out in the field and she would make radio contact with either myself or Zoe, she would have a lot more life to her character and be very interesting and very animated, almost as if it was written by two different people depending on who was writing the scene. I really liked Kira when I was out in the field, but at the hub world, not so much. Zoe was another sort of cardboard cutout of a person, because her arc was kinda simple and boring, where she starts off as just a random damsel in the hub area and you just sort of talk to her and she's clearly the love interest. And then her arc is just, I need to become the leader of Dharma, because someone has died. And it didn't really pay off correctly, and the character never developed properly for me. There's also another character who is apparently an antagonist from Ghostrunner 1, but he joins our side at the very beginning of the match and he's pretty decent, but he is also not really well developed. That's all I gotta say about the characters. Ghostrunner 2 to me was starting to get a little bit stale at around the 1/3 mark of the game, and I was kind of about to fall off and stop playing the game completely until they introduced the motorbike, and this is where the game really shines. Once you start getting bored with your current toolset, they instantly switch up the mode of travel or how we traverse the game world by giving us new tools and new puzzles to solve with those tools. It becomes a very Portal-like affair. Now I can say that the most apt translation for this game is Titanfall 2, whereas the moment we started getting bored of the current tools at our disposal, Titanfall 2 instantaneously switched up the procedure of how the game was played in order to keep the player entertained. However, Titanfall 2 is a relatively short game compared to Ghostrunner 2, totaling around like 3 hours max for the main campaign. Whereas Ghostrunner 2 can easily last you up to 10 hours and it's quite fun. There's a lot of side content and especially the speedrunning aspect of the game, where you want to try and defeat every single level without dying once and beat it at an extremely fast speed. Throughout the game there are also various terminals that you can do to challenge yourself to get yourself some more points for upgrading your character to be more proficient in its brutality of killing everything in sight. This happened again about 2/3 of the way through the game, where I was starting to get a little bit tired and repetitive of the awesome motorbike action, which it legitimately is the best part of the game, is the motorbike action.
Come on. Here goes.
Jack, can you hear me?
And then bam, they introduce a flight suit. Now there's been lots of flight suits in every other game, but this one is definitely the best flight suit. You can really see it shine when you do various combat encounters with the flight suit, and I recommend playing this game just to experience the flight suit sections of the game. It's absolutely brilliant. Now when it comes to performance, this game does not always shine perfectly. There are many sections where I felt absolutely flawless. There was no problems, no hiccups whatsoever, and then in a random section it would just absolutely plummet. Would go from having perfect 120, 165 frames per second all the way down to 40 FPS. And when you have such a gigantic divide between FPS, you just feel that just slow down of everything, especially when it happens during a combat encounter where you're used to really smooth and responsive controls to suddenly be sort of held back by the sludginess of the performance. Now I'm sure with future updates a lot of these performance woes will be fixed and updated, but as of release it was not perfect. I hope to God that they do release some updates and this game becomes flawless as it should be. This could be because I use a Ryzen processor that tends to be a lot worse in Unreal Engine compared to Intel processors, because the Unreal Engine has a heavy reliance on single-threaded performance. And unfortunately, Ryzen's single-threaded performance when it's not using the X3D chips are not exactly the best. They have a very broad CPU compared to a very narrow CPU like the Intel structure. Overall, I really enjoyed this game. I recommend that everyone picks up and plays Ghostrunner 2. I think it's probably the best of the November/October season so far. Comparing that to Spider-Man 2, of course, comparing that to Alan Wake 2, of course, and I think there was one other game that came out recently. Lords of the Fallen, that was it. It's definitely better than Lords of the Fallen. And what's really great about this game is its mission style structure. What do I mean by that? It's not exactly you always go back to the hub world and you proceed to do a mission, although that happens quite a bit. It is good because it allows you to have the option to clearly understand how long each mission is going to be, which is usually around 15 to 35 minutes, depending on how long the mission is. There was only one mission where I felt it was too long, but it was very clearly divided into 3 different sections so that you could personally take a break at the end of these 3 different sections. And this makes this game really good for just picking up and playing for about half an hour or an hour and just knowing that you can stop whenever and pick the game back right up where you were, and it's just perfectly fun. And the reason why I was doing this was because the Dota 2 International is going on right now, and there is usually a large break in between games, and that was when I was playing this game. I was going, alright, that Dota 2 game ended, let me launch up Ghostrunners 2, play a quick mission, and head back to watching Dota 2 International. And it was great. It worked perfectly for that. It would always just finish that mission right in time for the next game starting. It was fantastic. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a subscribe, give it a like. And yes, you should play Ghostrunners 2. It is out now on the various places. PlayStation 5, Xbox, whatever. Enjoy.
Bakunin!
Finally! Thought you'd never show up.